Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of City Lights Live. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis, and this afternoon, City Lights and the MIT Press celebrate the publication of Get Off My Neck, Black Lives, White Justice, and a former prosecutor's quest for reform. It is by Debbie Hines and is published by the MIT Press. Before we begin, as is customary at the outset of each event, I would like to acknowledge we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. We'd like to take this moment to offer our respect to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. So it is no secret that the American prosecutorial system has a long history of racial inequities. What is vexing is that despite all that has been brought to light in recent years, the problems still persist. Debbie Hines has not only produced a deeply revealing expose of the systemic problems, but offers methods on how we can transform the system to one of fairness and justice. In Get Off My Neck, Debbie Hines draws on her unique perspective as a trial lawyer, former prosecutor, and assistant attorney general for the state of Maryland to argue that the racial inequities in the prosecutorial system are built into our country's DNA. What's more, they are the direct result of a history that has conditioned Americans to devalue and fear Black citizens. Unlike other books that discuss the subject, Ms. Hines offers a provocative approach to fixing our broken system through a broad-based alliance of reform-minded prosecutors, activists, allies, communities, and racial justice organizations, all working together towards a common cause. Debbie Hines is former Baltimore prosecutor, assistant attorney general for the state of Maryland, and a trial attorney. She is an advocate for racial equity in the criminal justice system. She maintains a private law practice focused on civil and criminal litigation in Washington, D.C. A leading voice in the discourse of criminal justice and race, Ms. Hines is often called on by media networks for legal commentary. So she's going to be joined today in conversation by Andi Mazingo. Ms. Mazingo serves as General Counsel and Director of Legal Services at A Way of Life Reentry Project. Ms. Mazingo's personal commitment to racial, social, and economic justice saw her transition from corporate litigation to leading A New Way of Life's legal and family reunification departments. Her teams focus on facilitating community reentry through post-conviction legal aid in criminal probate and family courts and child welfare cases. So please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Debbie Hines and Andi Mazingo. It is great to have you both with us. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that great introduction. I thought that we could start with just a brief read and then go directly into Q&A afterwards. So I just wanted to read a little bit from the introduction to the book, just to kind of sort of set us focused on where we're going to be going with the questions. On an icy cold late December afternoon in 2022, I sat in a vehicle driven by Sam, a naturalized citizen who came to the United States as an immigrant from Pakistan and now owns a car service company. As we engaged in conversation, Sam talked about how America is a country where everyone has the same opportunities to advance. Sam talked about how he came to this country with few resources and now owns a fleet of vehicles. Sam said that he believes that in the United States, every person, regardless of race, can dream and work to turn those dreams into a reality. As Sam told his personal story of success, I remained silent. It was Christmas Eve, and hardly a good time for a challenging discussion, but I strongly disagreed with him. On another day, I might have told Sam how his experiences differ from those of many African Americans. I wish I could have told Sam about my experiences as a former prosecutor and the experiences of my family, neighbors, and clients charged with crimes whose lives were upended due to a racially biased prosecutorial system. I would have explained to Sam how by design, the power of the prosecutor perpetrates racial disparities against African Americans in the criminal justice system. Often overlooked, in the conversation about reforming the justice system is the pressing need to reform state prosecutorial offices, the most powerful institution in the criminal justice system. Prosecutors control all aspects of a criminal case. The United States has the largest criminal justice system in the world. Within this system, disproportionate numbers of Black children and youth are arrested, charged, and sentenced to prison every day before they are old enough to drive. 1 out of every 3 Black boys born in 2001 can expect to be imprisoned in their lifetime, compared to 1 in 17 white boys. A Black person is nearly 6 times as likely to be incarcerated as a white person. Black people represent 43% of the people in jail waiting for a trial to be held, while Black people make up only 13.4% of the US population. Police arrest Black people 10 times more frequently than they arrest white people, although Black people do not commit 10 times more crime. The most atrocious sentences are imposed by the death penalty. 44% of all people on death row since 1976 are Black people. The colorblind justice system in America is actually color-coded. Get Off My Neck provides strategies and a blueprint for prosecutors, community activists, racial justice organizations, lawmakers, and all people who desire to transform local and state prosecutorial offices so that they serve justice and racial equity. Thank you. Andi?
Yes, thank you so much. So Ms. Hines, what was your motivation or inspiration for writing the book?
So like, very interesting question, because most people think that by the title alone, that it was from George Floyd in 2020. But in reality, I'd wanted to write a book for a very long time. And I just really always said I couldn't find the time. My inspiration in that regard for everything that I've done is who I've dedicated the book to, which is my mother. Because my mother always said that you can do anything you want to do. She actually believed that as a dreamer person with only a 9th grade education. And so reality set in 2020 when we were all sitting at home, and I no longer had that excuse of, I'm not going to have time to write a book because I'm working every day. How am I going to fit time in to write a book while I am going to court with clients that have been charged with crimes? And so that was decided in that point. But the motivation is really my background and how I grew up. I'm not from a family of wealth or affluence. I have experience within my own family, people who were convicted of crimes, friends that I grew up with, childhood friends, neighbors, and even as young as 5 years old, even though I did not know it at the time, where I lived when I was 5, my mother always said, don't look out the window, which to a 5-year-old, that's the same thing as saying, go look out the window, because that's all I wanted to do. But the reason why she said that is our house, we lived in a 4-room apartment, 4 rooms, and across the street was a bar, and there were shootings on the weekend. And so she did not want a stray bullet to shoot me. Of course, you don't explain all of that to a 5-year-old, but that was in reality the beginnings of me knowing something, looking back in time, of the criminal justice system. And then my cousin, who I loved, and even though he was older than me, it was just always something that was talked about. When he was 16, he got into a fight with another boy. Edward was in high school at the time, and he thought that he was defending himself. And what ended up happening is he stabbed the boy, who died. And my cousin, instead of being charged with a crime that would have allowed him to proceed in the juvenile court system, where he would not have been involved in the adult court system, what happened was he was charged as an adult. He took a plea bargain, he was convicted, and at 16, before he even got through high school, he ended up serving 5 years in an adult prison. So my motivation is from what I know of friends who have had substance abuse issues, who have been charged with things such as shoplifting, but no matter what, they have ended up in jail, not having gotten treatment. So there's a lot of things that are just in my background that was the motivation for why I wanted to write the book and why I wanted to speak out against the system, that which I knew as a prosecutor, but that what I also experienced that friends and family members have gone through.
How did you come up with the book's title?
So everybody thinks, of course, that Get Off My Neck is a title that stems from George Floyd and, the protests and everything that happened to George Floyd. It does, but more in an indirect way, because in reality, what happened is because we were home again with the pandemic, I was at home and I was actually watching on TV the eulogy that was given by Reverend Al Sharpton for George Floyd. And in that eulogy, and somehow I was focused because everything was razor focused for me really in the pandemic once I'm at home. And Reverend Sharpton started speaking and he said, George Floyd's life is the life of African Americans for 400 years in this country. That George Floyd and other African Americans, we could be anything we wanted to be. We could do anything we wanted to do. We could run corporations, but you wouldn't get off our neck. It's a much longer version of what he said. The transcript is really online, but in that context, that just so resonated with me and what I saw and experienced in terms of police arresting people for nothing, just like George Floyd. I saw people that, yes, you could have been anything had you not gotten tripped up by a system for something that was a bogus charge. So in that context, just from what he said, it just crystallized for me in terms of pulling it together of what I wanted to do and needed to do to write this book.
What do you see as some of the most essential reforms needed to address the overcriminalization of Black communities?
Okay, Andy, so that is so broad, but I'm gonna chop it down a little bit just to explain a little bit about the system, and then answer it in that regard. So in the state and local prosecutorial system, which is what I'm talking about, there are 2,400 elected state and local prosecutors. That system makes up primarily the majority of all cases that are in the system. The federal system only has roughly, it varies from year to year, but roughly around 79,000 cases a year versus the 13 million misdemeanor cases every year. And when I say the word misdemeanor, while that means something different from state to state, but what we are talking about are low level, for the most part, nonviolent crimes, for the most part, crimes that do not affect public safety. So we're talking about things like possession of marijuana, shoplifting, disorderly conduct, nuisance, trespassing. Yes, we are also talking about driving while under the influence, which does affect public safety. But for the most part, prostitution, crimes that are just shouldn't either be on the books or should they really be prosecuted. So when I think, first of all, of what we can do to reform the system, we don't really even need to change the laws. When I say we as prosecutors don't really need to change the laws, because prosecutors pretty much have vast discretion as to who gets prosecuted, how they get prosecuted, what charges they get prosecuted, should their cases be dismissed and not even brought before they get into court. All of that is within the hands of the prosecutor. And so some prosecutors have done this, and everything I talk about in the book, it's not things off the top of my head. There are things that have actually been done already. And so some prosecutors, and particularly during the pandemic, declined to prosecute those low-level misdemeanor charges. And in cases where that was done, like for instance, in Baltimore City, where I've prosecuted, afterwards, Johns Hopkins University did a study, which was over, I think, 18 months or so, to see what was the effect of that. What was the effect of letting people, in essence, not be prosecuted, although they were already charged by the police. And what the study found is that the majority of those people, well into almost 100%, but into the 90s, the majority of those people did not go back and commit another crime, although their crime, their charges were declined to prosecute by the prosecutor. So the first reform that I think is just an easy one for prosecutors to do is to look at the vast majority of these nonviolent misdemeanor cases, some of which are also things that people don't even think of because the other ones are in the motor vehicle, the driving space. So you fail to get your insurance on time and that's sent somewhere and you are charged with, if you're driving, driving on without insurance. If you fail because for whatever reason you did not get your license renewed and you are driving on an expired license, that is a criminal case. You're going to be charged if the police stops you for driving on a suspended license. So what I'm saying in terms of the first reform that prosecutors can do, they can look at cases before they even enter the system, because prosecutors have no control over whether a police officer charges someone with the crime. That's a whole other area. And so what they can do is they can look at the cases that are coming in. And yes, many prosecutors' offices do have a review unit, whatever they're calling it, but that review unit usually is only reviewing to see if it meets the elements of a crime, not whether we should be prosecuting someone for urinating in the street. And so what I'm saying is, for a lot of the cases that when you go to court in most places, even in rural places, and it's a courtroom full of people, they're there for misdemeanors, and the vast majority of those should not have been prosecuted in the beginning. So that is one of the main things that prosecutors can do, and many that are progressive have started to do that, just chop down the list of the things that do we really need to prosecute for this, because is that really going to affect the public safety, which should be the primary concern. Then on the farther end of things, one of the things that's really good is that we work in a system where when we are prosecuting, let's say for serious crimes or murders, the system in the US, which is why there are so many millions of people there that we spend billions to place and keep there, we kind of have a system where we just sentence people and we never think more about it. Yes, they may come back up because they have post-appeal cases and things of that sort in the criminal system, but as prosecutors kind of just close the door when someone is charged, convicted, and that's it. And so on that end, the other reform, again, these are things that are already being done, that prosecutors can look at cases, review cases where people may be already serving time for 15 or 20 years or whatever the period of time that they want to look at it, and determine if those people still deserve to be in prison, or do they deserve a second chance? Because the duty of prosecutors is not to convict. That's what prosecutors think. But the duty, according to the American Bar Association, is to look towards justice. So those two things alone on the front end, declining to prosecute, as also on the back end for people who have already been convicted, but looking to see at a certain point of actually seeing that they're no longer a threat to society and that their sentence was really too long. We in reality have people who have been convicted of crimes at 15 and have stayed in prison until they were 79. That we are a civilized society and we have to do better. So those are just two things on the front end and on the back end that prosecutors can do that would alleviate a vast majority of people being in the system. Hope that answers it.
Yes, thank you. So focusing first on the front end, the book calls for an increased focus on hate crimes and white collar crimes. How might prioritizing these crimes shape the work and public perception of a prosecutor's office?
That's a great question. And the reason is because the perception and reality don't go together. The perception for any of us in any of the states in this country, the perception is that murder cases are rampant, violent crime cases are rampant, and we have to do something about that. And the perception is, again, that those are the majority of cases that are in the system. And that's not true. As I said before, the majority are the misdemeanors. But within the system, we seem to want to give white collar crime cases and hate crime cases a pass. Just today, when I was watching one of the news shows, they were speaking about the amount of Asian Americans that have faced hate crimes recently. And just the fact that they faced them doesn't mean that a prosecutor is really doing anything about that. On the white collar end, there are white collar cases that in effect help to make us unsafe. And what I mean by that, we always think of white collar cases as they just involve money. You know, somebody stole a lot of money, you know, the PPP loans. But there are white collar cases that prey on the lowest people in society. Those people, mostly Black people, or a lot of Black and brown people that live in areas where businesses feel through the payday loans, for instance, that they can illegally charge people exorbitant amounts of money that is illegal. Those cases don't, for the most part, end up in a paper or online anywhere. But in effect, those types of cases affect the people that the system is primarily targeting. And so even if we just put the emphasis on the other part of safety, hate crimes, that's a safety issue. You know, urinating in the street, nuisance crimes, disorderly conduct, trespassing, those are not safety issues. But someone threatens your life as a hate crime or does harm to you because of the color of your skin, your ethnicity, you're either LGBTQ, whatever. Those are the types of cases that should be prosecuted on a more frequent basis because they affect society as a whole, and they affect the safety of people as a whole. And again, on the white collar is not just tax fraud cases. White collar cases involve a lot of times people who are preying on other people. There have been the mortgage cases. People have lost houses because of mortgage scams that they thought they would own a house and they are left on the street, so to speak, because of something that a white collar person did. So yes, I would think that we should pursue those because in reality, the perception again is violent crimes are just at an all-time high. It may be so in certain jurisdictions, but when we're looking at it as the US as a whole, homicides in 2023 was at its lowest in something like 10 years. across the country. Again, it may be different in specific areas, but across the country on a nationwide level, homicide and violent crimes have been down for years. No one wants to see anyone murdered or injured in a violent crime, but the perception, again, is the opposite. And so I think we also need to bring into the fold some of these other cases that are not looked upon that should be looked upon.
Your book speaks about the conviction mentality. How does plea bargaining, including offers of probation, exacerbate the conviction mentality? And what are your thoughts on alternative approaches that could be more equitable?
So that, again, is such a good question, because when I first started prosecuting, I went with the mindset. Honestly, it sounds naive at 27, but I went with the mindset that I wanted to help not only victims of crime, but I wanted to help people who are charged with crime, such as my cousin. And like I said, a couple of friends from childhood that I knew. I went um, with that mindset to basically do that. But in reality, the system doesn't allow for that. So the system, when I went there, I thought I was doing a good thing by offering as a plea bargain to a lot of my misdemeanor cases, which is where I started, by offering people probation. And that was my naivete, because I had no clue how the probation system works. And the way the probation system works, it really just sets people up for getting one foot into the jail or the prison door. It doesn't give them, the way I was thinking at the time, oh, you got a free pass, you're going home today, you have probation. But the way the probation system works, without any help from the system, Black people are most likely throughout the country to be placed on supervised probation versus unsupervised probation. And on unsupervised probation, literally, you can just go home and live your life. As long as you don't get arrested for anything else, you're good to go. In supervised probation, which is the vast majority of Black people are placed on supervised probation, oh my God, there's a whole long list of things that you need to do to stay in compliance with your probation. And compliance meaning you will not be brought back into court on a violation of probation, which is then going to send you to jail. And some people can have as many as 10 or more conditions of probation, all of which are, some places you have to pay mandatory monthly fees to be on probation. If you are on probation and for whatever reason you are being monitored, so you have that ankle bracelet thing on, that costs money. That costs your money as the probationer. You have to always see your probation officer at least once a week. Sometimes you're allowed to call, but a lot of times you're required to come in. Again, that costs money. There's drug screening and just a whole long litany of things. You may have to get your GED if you don't have that, show proof of looking for a job. But the list goes on and on and on. So probation, if you violate, you don't do one of those things, whether it's a technical thing or a non-technical thing because you committed another crime, you can end up where you thought you would not be ending up in the beginning, back in prison. So probation just really doesn't do that. And it doesn't, for the most part, it doesn't help people, because a lot of times people have genuine issues. Majority, not the majority, well, almost 50% of a lot of people that are in jail have mental health issues. A lot of people have substance abuse issues. And so the system isn't equipped to actually help those people. And so other programs that are diversionary programs, not declining necessarily to prosecute, but other programs that can actually help people outside of the system, other than just setting them up like a domino so that they can trip and fall and end up into prison or jail. That is what probation does.
Focusing on police officers for a moment, the suggestion of integrity units to combat police misconduct is significant. How do you envision their operation within a prosecutor's office?
So when we're talking about integrity units, what we are talking about, and this has been done in New York and Baltimore and other cities throughout the country with progressive prosecutors, what we are talking about are situations where the prosecutor's office has investigated police officers, either individually or collectively as a unit that they're working in, and have found that those police officers, either in a case or multiple cases, have violated the law. They've been charged with crimes and they've been convicted of crimes. And in the past, that would be that. But when we're talking about integrity units, we're talking about, well, let's go back and look at the cases that those police officers had. Regardless of whether people pled guilty to something, let's look at the cases that those police officers had. So by way of an example, in Baltimore, and there's been this in other cities as well, there was a unit that was a gun trace unit. And obviously their unit had to do with trying to get guns off the street. And that sounds like a good thing, except that that particular unit was planting drugs on people. They were planting guns on people. They were doing a lot of illegal things to people who really were innocent. But because, as in many instances, it was the police officer's word against the defendant, many defendants in the Baltimore gun cases decided that they would just plead guilty. Let me just, how is my word going to go against the police officers? And so what ended up happening is actually the feds were investigating this police unit in Baltimore, and they discovered, yes, that these police officers were doing illegal things, had charged people for things. And at that time, the Baltimore State's attorney, she reviewed her office, each and every one of the cases that had been affected by that unit through the integrity unit. And in doing so, she dismissed 850 to 1,000 people's cases, even though some of them had already served time, it would still wipe out their conviction for what had been done. And not enough of that is really done. And that's not to say that all police officers are bad, but it means there has to be some type of integrity unit that is reviewing. Many prosecutor offices have what's called the do not call list. And that may not be police officers who have been convicted of anything. It may not be police officers who have been charged with anything. But the prosecutor's office has their names on a list because for whatever reason, they are not trustworthy. And so, and with good reason for whatever the individual situation may be. And so in an integrity unit, it would allow the state's attorney, the DA, the chief prosecuting attorney, whatever they're called, it would allow them to look at those cases that were by those people who are on a do not call list for a reason, to see if those cases deserve merit to be reviewed upon, to see if whatever happened to the cases or if they're pending cases, to dismiss them. So integrity units come about in a wide variety of situations, but at the end of the day, they're involving, for the most part, police officers who have either done something wrong for which they've been charged, convicted, or or that we just know you're not doing what you should be doing as a police officer, but not just giving them a pass, but actually looking at people. And I know that there have been other places, New York, actually Alvin Bragg's office has done the same thing. I think there's been other offices in New Orleans. So again, it's not something that's new. It just needs to be something that's done on a wider basis, because we can't have a system again that we lock and jail people up and then we never come back and look at their cases again.
Can you share with us particular cases of prosecutorial misconduct that you've experienced?
So that's interesting, because we kind of have to backdoor that a little bit. And I know people may not want to hear this, but prosecutors, for the most part, have absolute immunity. And unless prosecutors have committed a crime, and I'm not just talking about I'm not just talking about the DA, but all prosecutors, ever since the Supreme Court decided a case back in 1970s or something, for the most part, with rare exceptions, prosecutors have absolute immunity involving a case. So that the only way that prosecutors run into a file with issues has to do with crime. And even with that, it's only been probably less than a handful since my research. So for instance, there was a recent case near where I live where a prosecutor was getting subpoenas issued for records, getting subpoenas issued for phone records and text messages and other things of that nature. And while that seems like, what would be wrong with that? But where he ended up getting convicted was he wasn't doing it as a result of a case. He was using his prosecutorial powers to get these against a former girlfriend, which had nothing to do with the case. She wasn't charged with anything. He was just using his prosecutorial powers to write off and sign off on subpoenas. So again, that gets around the absolute immunity issue. And then there was a DA who was a DA that was the predecessor to Larry Krasner, who's a DA in Philadelphia now, where that particular DA, whose name is escaping me, he ended up getting lavish gifts and airplane tickets and a bunch of other things and money and a lot of different things so that he would then use that as an exchange way to offer leniency to lawyers' cases. So anyway, he ends up getting charged for extortion and bribery because that's a crime. You cannot say, if you pay me this, I will do that. I'm in a position of power. And he actually did serve time. But as to your specific question, it's very rare that under a prosecutor doing something that falls in the category of misconduct versus crime, that anything would happen. So answering it in a direct way, when I prosecuted, and it's pretty much the same way, unlike in private practice where we have staff meetings and we go over cases and I want to know what's going on with your case, Andi. I mean, that really doesn't exist that much in the prosecutor's office unless it's some really high-end big case that's going on. For the most part, we work alone. And even though it's said that we are in teams, that's like a misnomer because the team is just a word, means that we're all assigned to the same judge, period. It doesn't mean we're having staff meetings and we're discussing our cases and what are you doing about this? That just doesn't exist. And combined with the fact that most head prosecutors are 95% white, a lot of the offices that prosecute are majority white. So even though I did it decades ago, that was the way with my office. And so I'm saying all that to say, I wouldn't have known of any prosecutors that committed any misconduct because it'd be very rare that a white male prosecutor would be letting me in on anything that they were doing that they should not have been doing. I mean, that's just a reality. So I wasn't privy, and it's not to say anyone wasn't doing it. I would have probably been the last person to know about it. And any one of my other sister Black women prosecutors, we would be the last ones to really know if anyone was doing anything that was improper.
So to that point, I want to try and get in one more question before audience Q&A. How can prosecutors foster or participate in Black-white pro-justice alliances to promote reform, as you suggested in the book?
Thanks. That's a really good question too, because that's the basis of what has to happen. The only way that we will have true reform is if Black-white alliances are formed individually, racial justice organizations, as well as prosecutors. For prosecutors, as I said, the majority of prosecutors that are head prosecutors prosecuting in the offices, not the line ones, are white. And what I suggest is that they need to go to the community that they are primarily prosecuting. They need to have some involvement with the community on a significant basis, not just having a meeting and that's a one and done, but actually getting involved with racial justice organizations that are in the communities that they're involved in. And I suggest that not only do prosecutors always say to my clients, oh, you have to do, your client, he or she needs to do community service. I think all prosecutors, whether they're leading the office or just in the office, they should be doing community service hours, just as my clients are. And so that there is involvement with the community that they are serving so that they understand how some people really actually live. And that would just go a long way. There have been so many instances that I outlined in the book, and I'm checking on the time so we can stay on it. There have been so many instances that I outline in the book where that is how reforms have been done. And lastly on this, just to know how big things can happen when that is actually done. In Illinois, in September of 2023, so just this last September, Illinois became the first state in the US, not including the District of Columbia, which is a jurisdiction, which also is in this category. But Illinois became the first state in this country to outlaw cash bail. So they don't have people that are lingering in jail because they can't pay before their trial. They might be in jail because they're a threat to society, but it won't be because they couldn't make $1,000 bail. And that was done over a period of years with the few progressive prosecutors, with racial justice organizations, with individuals, with everybody working together, Black and white alliances, a lot of door knocking. That's what can be done. So I guess we can open it up now for Q&A so that we have time to answer questions and not just all talking between us.
So let's see. Our first question is, grand juries pose problems for the system where the defense attorneys can't present evidence. And then they go on to talk about how their Black child was charged with a serious crime. And then later, because some cell phones were cracked, it was revealed that they hadn't committed, that they were in the right. It was more like self-defense. And so the question at the bottom is, why is the system set up so backward is related to grand juries?
Okay, so everything in life, or most things in life, have a yin and a yang, a good and a bad reason. And in grand jury work, the reason why grand juries are secret may not individually have to do with that particular person's case, but on a broader sense, if the grand jury were not secret, and when we say secret, yes, meaning that the defense attorney doesn't go in and get to plead their case for the person, that's done at the trial level, is because in cases where there are murder cases, where people are fearful, witnesses are fearful of coming forward, of letting it be known that they knew anything about it. When there are drug cases, similarly, where people are fearful of having to come forward, the grand jury system allows for a lot of cases like that to actually be able to resolve cases because people would not come forward. They would be in fear of their lives in a lot of instances. And so even though it cuts against in that particular case and maybe in other cases, that's really what the trial is for, because the grand jury is just to whether or not there will be an indictment or not. But there are a lot of cases where, and it can be even as simple as an assault, that people would not come forward if the person that they're testifying against in the grand jury would know about it in advance.
There is another comment. The prison to pipeline is real in African-American community. Movements are in place to change this, but nothing seems to change. Blacks, especially Black males, are still the largest number of those incarcerated. That's more of a comment.
Yes, that's a comment that I do want to address because it's one that I addressed in my book at the end. When I say that a lot of times people think that things can't change, and that's the perception that things cannot change or they're not changing. But what I want to bring people around to, and this does go back to why I wrote the book and the title of the book. In 2020, upwards of 26 million people marched in this country for racial justice. The majority of those people were white people. They risked their lives because we were in a pandemic, and then they went back home, and that is where we are now. And so what I wanted to say is that things can change if we mobilize individually, collectively, through alliances, because we are not, we meaning the people who want racial justice, we outnumber the other ones. In 2020, that was the largest march in US history ever. But it's a matter of people realizing like, okay, marching was good, but the work is going to take a little bit of a notion. And there are organizations, racial justice organizations that are doing the work that want to change the prison to pipeline issue, but pipeline to prison issue. But at the end of the day, they need more people. And there are enough people out there to work with them.
Susan asks, how do you remain committed and optimistic when so many forces exist to ensure that the racial divide remains strong in this country?
So why I'm more committed has to do probably, which I do talk about in the book, probably has to do more with my own, that's a personal question, my own individual family history. Recently, actually around 2020, I have a family member who had spent decades researching my family history on my father's side. And what she had discovered is my great grandmother, so my father's grandmother, my great grandmother was born enslaved 5 years before the emancipation. She lived a really long life until 1952. And she lived through a lot of things in her life. On my mother's side, my mother and both my parents have only a 9th grade education. My mother in North Carolina ended up leaving 9th grade and had to sharecrop, picking cotton. And so I say that briefly to say that through my own family history, the things that my family have been able to see that me and my brother have been able to accomplish would be unimaginable. And so that is why I have hope, but I had people behind me. And that is why I'm stressing that the 26 million people that got out there, risked their lives, and many more that were at home that didn't want to risk their lives, but so much in full solidarity and support. It is a matter of just organizing them to know that we, the people, have the power.
Well, as we're coming up to the top of the hour, Ms. Mazingo, did you have any last thoughts or parting comments before we wrap?
No, I just want to say, I love your book, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be in this discussion with you.
I'm so glad you're able to join me. Thank you so much, Andi.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank both of you for joining us today and for all the important work that you do, and really very honored to have you on the program. Today's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through our public events, our publishing program, and educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and critical thinkers. So take care, everyone. We hope to see you all again soon. Be well.